All right, well, I'm very happy to be joined by Gerard O'Connell, our new Vatican correspondent for America. Welcome, Gerard. Nice to see you.
Thank you. It's very good to be with you.
Yeah, we're very excited to have you on board, and this is our first conversation. We'll hopefully do this quite often because you'll be in Rome and we're here, so we want to keep the communication lines open.
Happily.
We want to talk about your trip to the Holy Land with Pope Francis. This is your first foray as a correspondent for America. Maybe you can just start by sharing some general impressions of the trip, and must have been a whirlwind in those just few days.
Well, I've been on 3 papal trips to the Holy Land. I was there with John Paul II, with Benedict XVI, and now with Francis. And this really was the most intense trip that I have been on. We had, the Pope gave 13 speeches in 3 different countries. Yeah. Well, Palestine, almost a country. And he moved with such speed. I mean, he's 77 years old, but he's moving like a man who's, in his 50s. And he's tireless. We were exhausted at the end of the trip, and he gave this 45, 46-minute interview on the plane and wanted to even give more until the Vatican press officer, Father Lombardi, said, look, they have to serve dinner. It's only a 3 3/4 hour flight. But his boundless energy, I wrote in one of my articles that he's a tireless pope. And but I think the extraordinary thing, he knew he was going into what is effectively a religious and political minefield. And I think he really navigated with extraordinary dexterity and skill in that area. And he managed, we all knew that Jordan wasn't going to be difficult. It was an easy number because there's good harmony between Christians and Muslims there. The king is very sympathetic to the Christians. They have started there. They opened up to try and improve the dialogue. And they're also offering enormous assistance to the refugees from the war in Syria. They've had, for many years, they've had Palestinian refugees, then they had the Iraqi refugees. So the country has got, 6.3 million people, and it's got 1.3 million refugees. The Pope described it as extraordinary generosity, but a humanitarian disaster which the world has to come in and help. So he appealed to the international community to help them. But I think what was very significant in Jordan was the Pope's own wish to actually go to the point where there was suffering. He went down to the Bethany, went to the place where Jesus was baptized, and put his hands in the water and rubbed his forehead before he went to meet the refugees. And then he spent real time with them and listened to their stories. And he spoke out very strongly. He says, the time has come to end the war in Syria, to allow the humanitarian assistance to get through, to have the humanitarian law respected. And it's time to reach a solution to the 66-year-old Palestinian-Israeli conflict.
Yes, maybe we can speak a bit about that. That was obviously the big news coming out of the early days, was this initiative, which we now understand is a moment of prayer that he's invited the Israeli and Palestinian leaders to the Vatican to take part in.
Well, yes, he's called it a moment of prayer, but you've had a situation which there's been a stalemate. The American administration, they tried to push to get an accord between the two sides, and then, I understand, more or less, threw in the towel at a certain point. And suddenly, and there was a lot of despondency among the Palestinians, the Israelis, that, this was going nowhere, and they were still back to the old cycle of mistrust, perhaps violence. Nobody quite knew how the situation would degenerate. And out of the blue, the Pope comes in and says, I'm inviting the President of Israel and the President of Palestine to come and pray with me. Now, to get peace, I think, in this part of the world, you have to create a climate in the public opinion as well. Because the political leaders are not willing to move unless they are sure that they're not going to lose out with their own side, to their kind of basin of support. And I think what the Pope is doing is he's kind of jump-starting the system, the process. He's trying to get the two leaders to come and spend time with him in the Vatican, and there will be a rabbi and there will be a Muslim leader with them, and together they will pray. Now, here you've got a Christian leader bringing a Muslim leader and a Jewish leader together to pray for peace. And today, at the public audience, the Pope asked all the people there, and obviously the Christians in the world, join with us in praying. Don't leave us alone. And I think what he's hoping to do is, by drawing attention to this, by bringing together two men whom he says are men of peace, they're elderly men, they're both near the end of their terms, but Perez has been for a long time a big figure in the country. He's got the Nobel Prize as well, but he's been a main figure for many years in Israeli history. And Abbas also has been playing a significant role in his own people. And they're apparently the two of them are in contact quite a bit behind the scenes. And so here they're coming together. Now, what's going to come out of it, we don't know. But one thing is certain, the whole spotlight of public opinion is now being focused on this. And this says two things. First of all, it's injecting hope into what seemed a hopeless situation. These peoples, they've lived in the darkness of violence, of killing, of fear, of mistrust. I've watched it over the years, Tim. I visited this part of the world maybe 30 years ago first. And I have seen the situation degenerate. I remember my first impression when I went there 30 years ago or more was, to see all these young people in Israel carrying guns. And I thought, wow. And then to realize that now 30 years later, they've still been carrying guns. And then you see that the situation of the Palestinians has deteriorated. You see the Israelis don't have security despite this wall, despite this kind of protection and aerial protection that the Americans have given them. There is not peace, and peace is not on the horizon. At the leadership level, I hear among the politicians and such like, there's a certain fear about this boycott program that's starting up, grassroots organizations. And they think to South Africa, where a big disinvestment program started, and kind of a moral delegitimization of the white government in South Africa began to take shape. I spoke to two rabbis recently who were both living in Jerusalem. And I said to them, well, the peace process seems to be reached a dead end. And I said, so what's we going to have, just one state solution? And both of them said, no, that would be the death of Israel. And now this is what the Pope has stepped into. He stepped into a situation of almost total failure of negotiators to reach a solution. And he brings in two very senior figures, one from each side, and brings them together to pray. This Pope is, first of all, a spiritual leader, but he's recognized in Israel and Palestine as a moral authority. I mean, in Israel, they say he's like a superstar. This is what rabbis have told me, not the ordinary person in the street, the rabbis. And I saw that the respect with which he's been treated, the Israelis were terrified that somebody might, shoot him. And so you had the security, the highest level of security, such as you would have when the US president goes to Israel. Mm-hmm. And it's into this situation, I think he's going to mobilize people for prayer more and more, because he believes very strongly that prayer can move mountains.
Now maybe we can talk briefly about his meeting with the Patriarch of Constantinople, and obviously historic meeting. What were your impressions of that moment?
Well, I actually watched them embrace. I was not very far from them. I think it's very clear that both the Patriarch of Constantinople, Bartholomew, and Pope Francis, they both want to move as far as possible, as quickly as possible, to unity. And they want to do what they can today to make that journey quicker and more extensive, because they realize they have to take the people with them. But there is a real spirit, and you see the spirit of love. I don't fail to use that word. Between them, there was such gentleness, such consideration for each other, and obviously they're on the same page. On the plane coming back from Tel Aviv, the Pope said, "We talked together as brothers. We talked about the problems we have in governance. And then we talked about the need to perhaps do something about creation, about the environment, maybe do some project together." And there one began to wonder if the Pope is already, we know, working on an encyclical on the environment. And the question is, will he bring in Bartholomew now, and maybe we get a joint Catholic Orthodox document on the environment? That would be really a very fine thing. We've not had this before.
Yeah, that's really intriguing. That was one of the things you wrote about for us that I thought was very interesting. And then you have the plane ride back. I mean, another, as you mentioned, a long conversation. The Pope touched on a number of matters, including he's going to meet with sex abuse victims, talked about the issue of celibacy. So really a lot covered there.
Yes, I mean, on the sex abuse, he came out, he said very clearly, from here on, it's a zero tolerance policy. He said we've got 3 bishops under investigation, clearly for abuse, and he said the abuse of a child is a sacrilege, because the child represents Jesus, and to abuse a child is to abuse Jesus. This is the way he thinks, he feels. And then he said, "I'm going to meet." I don't think it's going to be in June. I think maybe July. He's going to meet 8 victims. I think 2 from Germany, perhaps 2 from Britain. We don't know exactly the whole makeup of the group. But he's going to celebrate Mass with them, and then he's going to meet them, sit with them, talk with them. And he's very determined that, that there has to be real coherence across the Church on this question. So the question of accountability is going to come back into play. And this new commission is going to discuss that. A bishop who fails to follow the guidelines that now have been approved in the Church for handling of the abuse cases, I think that bishop is not going to stay too long in his see once Francis gets his act together on this. Then on the question, he raised the question of celibacy. He said, for me, it's a rule of life. I've always been very happy with it, but it's not a closed door. It's not a dogma. He said, we've got married priests in the Coptic, in the Eastern Rite churches. He didn't say, in fact, I think in Britain, in England and Wales, you have maybe 300 married Catholic priests who've come over from the Anglicans, from the Church of England. And then he touched also on the question of resignation. Somebody asked, are you going to follow Benedict XVI if you feel that you haven't the energy to continue with the job? And he said, well, I would pray, I would ask God, try to understand what's God's will for me. But he said, one thing is clear, Benedict isn't a unique case, he's an institution. So from now on, you can have emeritus popes. Yes, he was asked what are the obstacles to the reform in the Curia, and he began jokingly and said, me. And then he went on to explain. He said, we've consulted everybody in the Curia. There are various proposals. The Council of eight advisors will meet in September for 4 days, at the end of September. And obviously it's a work in progress, and he says, I'm happy with it. He said, some people don't seem to have clear ideas, he said, but obviously, he says, the path is one of persuasion. He's made clear that what it effectively means is kind of a simplification, a lighter organization, merging of different offices, a downsizing in some ways. And then he said on the financial side, because he was asked about the financial recent scandals as well in the Vatican, he said we've set up this Secretariat for the Economy, headed by Cardinal Pell, which will play a major role in preventing the misuse of funds. And he said there's an investigation going on for a loan given through the Institute for the Work of Religions, in other words, the Vatican Bank. An investigation is going on this loan, in which this former Cardinal Secretary of State Bertone is involved. He said, we don't have the final definite results of this yet. It could be true, but we don't know yet. But he said, the Lord told us that we will have scandals, but we have to work so as to minimize that.
Well, there was a lot covered in 3 days, and I think you deserve a rest afterwards, but we look forward to your future coverage for us in America.
Sure, I'm very happy to be with you and to try and contribute in my own way to people understanding what this Pope is about and where he's going. I think we've got a great Pope. I said, at the end of this week that when he was elected, we said he's a gift to the Church. I now see very clearly he's a gift to the world.
Yeah. Well, we look forward to covering that, and hopefully for a good long time. And I think this summer we're going to start your coverage, so we look forward to that.
Thank you, Tim.
All right, thanks very much. Gerard O'Connell. Take care.